Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross of GeneaVlogger and welcome back to another professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to surprising Canadian DNA test results, 23andMe, from Adventures and Naps. I am not familiar with this channel at all. It is a decently big channel, 113,000 subscribers. I think it's pretty obvious that she's probably Canadian, but that could be any sort of ancestry because it's basically like the US. It's, could come from anywhere because either you're from immigrant ancestors or you're from indigenous people in the Americas. Based on the photo she has of her channel, she looks Caucasian, so I'm gonna guess kind of that typical Western European, British, French, Germanish, Italian. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities. I mean, there could be some Nordic countries, Baltic states, Balkans, Eastern European, all sorts of stuff. But basically, any of the typical Caucasian populations. But we'll have to see. But before we do jump into the video, please be sure to give this a like. That really does help me out. Also, be sure to subscribe and click that bell for notifications. But with all that fun stuff said, let's go ahead and jump into the video.
Hi everyone, it's me. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alana and I'm a Canadian, but I've been living here in England for over 5 years. Now, I try to say that in most of my videos, so if you have found my YouTube videos, you kind of have some little idea of who I am. But what does it really mean to be Canadian? I have so many of these in my house and I never know what to do with them. Now, on the flip side, because I've been living in the UK for so long, I have a lot of viewers who say that I shouldn't call myself a foreigner anymore and that I am an honorary Brit, that I've been here for so long and I have adapted to the British way of life.
Does anyone know if she has British citizenship? Because I'm pretty sure it's pretty difficult to get it. Although, now that I think about it, I think there's some sort of special thing with Canadians and Brits. I don't really know for sure. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are like, how does he not know? But I'm sorry. Just a stupid American, man.
So really I am British. But am I really? So I thought it would be fun to share with you guys my 23andMe Ancestry results. Now, I recently got an email actually from 23andMe saying that they found a trace heritage section, whatever, from my DNA. Now, this is only a 0.2%, so obviously it is very small, hence the word trace. But guess what country it's from? Did you guess Cyprus? Yes, I have a tiny trace ancestry from some part of the family tree from Cyprus, which I thought was pretty cool. I've never been there. My next section in my DNA history, if you will, comes in at 32.8%. Did you guess Dutch? Because you would be right. So once we move away from trace ancestry, my next largest ancestry section is from the Netherlands. So this is a pretty decent...
Okay, she's unfortunately she's interpreting this a little off. So what this is saying is not that she's 32.8% Dutch, which I was going to say there's no way that they would be defining Netherlands by themselves. Even like trying to define the Low Countries. I don't know why I did quotes like that because they are the Low Countries, but like the Low Countries would fall into French and German or British Isles or general European. Like I don't know of any company that specifically defines it. So what's going on here? She's 32, the reading is 32.8% of the French and German population group. It's called French and German because that's the large majority of the group. And then that's not even including the fact that it's still sometimes difficult for them to decipher between the French and German stuff and then stuff around it, like maybe more Southern European or Italian or Iberian or things like that, because there is all of this connection in the ancestry. So what it's saying here when it says Netherlands highly likely match, it's saying that this 32.8%, or at least of this 32.8%, a lot of it is likely correlating to the Netherlands, and that's based on the fact that her genetic matches have put in that they have Ancestry in the Netherlands. So it's like an AI type of thing. It's an algorithm. It goes through all the matches and it looks for what places of origin, what birthplaces are all of these matches having in common. And it's finding a whole bunch of matches where it has the Netherlands is where they were from, and they're also getting the French and German readings, and they're also matching her. And because of that, they can come to the conclusion that, okay, well, it's very likely that you're getting this French and German from Dutch roots. So it's not saying 32.8% Dutch. It's saying 32.8% of the French and German population group. And of that, they think that the Dutch, at least the Netherlands, are a big majority of that. But it could be off. More than likely it's probably right. But, with these types of things, it's just an estimate. And we're not really getting a percentage estimate with Netherlands. We're just kind of getting this highly likely match. So my guess is it's just, if she looked at her genetic matches, she would find a ton of them with Ancestry in the Netherlands. And I know some of these sites, I'm pretty sure Ancestry does it. I think 23andMe does it, but they'll get even more specific. So like they might give like towns that you have a lot of matches that are listing that town as birthplaces of their ancestors.
Chunk. It's categorized as French or German, but it is from the Netherlands. So there are some regions in the Netherlands that I have ancestry from. I really don't want to try and read them, but I'm going to anyways.
Okay, so what I was talking about, so basically all the matches that she has, they're listing these areas, or a lot of them are listing these areas as where they were living, their ancestors were living. And so it's listing those in an order, most likely on what's most common among the matches. And so it's basically, if you have a lot of matches where they all come from one certain area, then there's a higher likelihood that you have ancestry there. Although it's also a possibility that you don't have ancestry there. You just have a lot of relatives who live there. So that is, that's one thing to remember when looking at this stuff, is there's all these sorts of possibilities with their estimations. So kind of saying, yes, this is from that isn't the best way to do it. The way she said it, I will say, it sounds like she knows that she had Dutch ancestry, which I feel like a lot of people with Dutch ancestry probably know it. And especially a lot of Dutch names kind of stick out, especially when you have what's known as a Tussenvogel. I'm sure I said that incorrectly, but that's like Dick Van Dyke, the Van, that's a Tussenvogel. So actually his last name, his surname would just be Dyke. So the full surname is Van Dyke, but the Van is just a Tussenvogel. So there's also names like De Jong, which is the most common name in the Netherlands, I believe. People see it all the time, especially in like Spanish or Portuguese last names, and a lot of other names, De La Cruz and stuff like that, where it's not one name, but it's multiple, and there's like little Des or Vans or whatnot. So yeah, just fun little Dutch history there.
We have Friesland, Gelderland, North Holland, South Holland, Drent, and Utrecht. Oh, I'm so sorry. But that's a pretty big chunk at 32.8% is Dutch. Now, this is actually not surprising to me because what I know from my family tree is that I do have relatives from Holland that were, born and raised in Holland for many years and eventually moved to Canada and then started that sort of family tree in Canada.
Now, this leads me to something interesting I wanted to mention, and I've had a few people bring this up in the polls I do in the community, and that's the usage of relatives versus ancestors. For some people, the term relative will be used for your ancestors as well as your cousins and aunts and uncles of various, great uncles or whatnots. Whereas some people will use ancestors when talking specifically about the people that they descend directly from versus their relatives who are the people that are related to them. I personally go with the latter because I think it's best to distinguish. So right there where she says relatives, she's meaning her ancestors. Whereas for me, I think it's important distinction because like I said before, what if she just knew that she had some cousins who lived in Amsterdam and then moved to Canada and it wasn't necessarily her ancestors, and then it turns out that those cousins weren't even from Amsterdam. They'd actually come from Germany to Amsterdam and then to Canada. Which there's a lot of family stories that are similar to that in some different way. So that's one reason why I like to be kind of distinguishing with that is when you're talking about relatives versus ancestors, to me, I think of ancestors as those who I descend directly from and relatives as those who I'm related to. So technically, ancestors would fall under that, but it almost like just be saying family members. To me, but then that's getting a little bit more into, the nuances of what do you call family and immediate family and all that. But anyway, I'm just really kind of focusing on the whole relatives versus ancestors. So comment down below, tell me what you think, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that have the same thoughts as me, where they've heard people use the terms relatives in a way describing ancestors. Or some people will hear the term ancestors and not think of it as just their direct, who they directly descend from, but relatives from the past as well.
So the Dutch stuff, not that surprising, but I had no idea in terms of regions or areas of the Netherlands. So that's pretty cool.
If she wanted to, she would be able to trace that family tree in the Netherlands far back quite easily, more than likely, because the records in the Netherlands that's like the gold standard in my opinion. There's so much and it's all available online for free. Or at least everything that's online and digitized has to be free because there's an actual Dutch law saying that it has to be free. So like there's all sorts of websites, like We Was We. I'm going to put the titles here, for the websites, or I'm somewhere on the screen, although I'm sure I'm pronouncing some of them off, or incorrectly, but there's We Was We, there's Open Arch, which a lot of people will know as Open Archive. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Then there's also, you can find all sorts of other archive websites. Like I personally use the Amsterdam Archives website all the time. I have an old tutorial about how to use it, although they did a huge overhaul on the website. Now it's completely different from when my tutorial was made. There's so much in terms of Dutch records to trace those family trees, and more than likely, if she looked into, actually more than likely, she probably already has a family tree that's super well extensively built out by some relative of hers, and she just doesn't really realize, and if she were to trace back just enough, she would connect into it. So, if she goes on like genie.com or Wikitree or something like that, she'll probably find a huge chunk, or at least huge chunks of her family tree available already and well researched.
Now, the next section in the largest section of my DNA ancestry profile thing comes in at 65.6%. Can I get a drum roll? Alana, who is editing this video, can I get a drum roll?
British Isles?
It's...
While she's plugging her Patreon, I'll plug mine. I have all sorts of extra content on my Patreon, and I also will be putting a lot of videos up early whenever I get the chance. So if you want early access, you want access to exclusive content, so there are exclusive reactions that you can only watch if you're a Patreon patron of mine. Really helps me out, and just for a buck or a couple bucks or whatever, you get a lot of fun content, extra content, early content, all that fun stuff.
British. Yes, the largest chunk of my ancestry is British. It's labeled as British and Irish, but I don't have any Irish portions. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
That she knows about. I think I've kind of already explained this previously in this video. She's jump into very specific conclusions about it. Like, it says British and Irish, but I have no Irish. Well, she doesn't know for sure. Not always the best to jump to these conclusions. Even if it doesn't say Ireland or give you Irish cities, it doesn't mean that you don't have Irish ancestry. It very well could be hiding somewhere in there, and maybe not even that far back.
But just like the Netherlands one, I found it really interesting that we get regions. So 23andMe says that the UK has 165 administrative regions, and they found the strongest evidence of
Let me guess, it'll probably be in London, because that's such a large city with so many people being there that a lot of people I've found will get London, at least in their top couple of cities, if they have British and Irish or British Isles or whatever website you have, however they define it. Usually you get the London area as one of the ones that will come in.
My ancestry in the following 10 regions. So the question here is, am I more southern or am I more northern? That's the question.
But this also, I should mention again, this is not an order of these are where your ancestors are from. Number one is you have most ancestors from this one. Number two, that's not what's going on. These are just based on her genetic matches. So it's not like she's going to know for sure, oh, I'm more southern or more northern from this. These are where your relatives are, or at least the areas that your relatives have listed as places where their ancestors were from. So yeah, that's really all you can conclude from it. This is not her ancestry. It's not saying she's more northern British or more southern or western or eastern or whatever what you want to say. It's where her relatives have said that their ancestors were from.
Question. Number one, Greater London. That's right.
Well, I told
Greater London is number one.
Because it's a large metropolis. And so there's a lot of people where they will have ancestry, where they had ancestors born or living in London. But remember too, that this is looking at the people's, all of their trees, or all, everything within their tree. So if someone has, grandparents or great grandparents who were from those areas, you have 4 grandparents. So of all of her genetic matches, she's only going to be related to them through more than likely she'll be related to all of her matches through one grandparent. That's not always the case, especially for those with endogamy. That means that for every match she has, if they list all 4 of their grandparents, 3 of the 4 places that are listed won't really relate to her connection to them. And so because of that, you're going to get a lot of matches where 3 out of those 4 that aren't connected to you may be in London. So it's just kind of a numbers game. I hope I explained that right, because this is one of those things where it's like it kind of makes sense, but it's hard to explain. And yeah, but like in 23andMe, for anyone who's done 23andMe, when you go on to 23andMe, the big thing that you do is you put in where were the birthplaces of your paternal grandfather, your paternal grandmother, your maternal grandfather, your maternal grandmother, and then they have surnames, and then they have other places that your family was. So most of this information, I think, is based off of the places people list for their grandparents, but also the places they list for the other locations. So if you're getting someone like me where they've traced out the family tree really well, I have locations of my ancestors where, the last ancestor of mine born in that area was like a 2nd or 3rd great grandparent. So that's really far back. And when you get that far back, you only have 4 grandparents, but you have 8 great grandparents, 16 great great grandparents, 32 3rd great grandparents. Is that right? Yeah. And 64 4th great grandparents. So it just keeps doubling every generation. So if you're putting stuff back for your, 3rd great grandparents, well, you have 64 of them. So that's 64 different birthplaces. And so the way that you're related to whoever you're connecting to is probably going to be only through one of those 64, more than likely. So hopefully that kind of gives a bit more sense to that. Let's just continue, see what's listed.
Are you shocked? I thought this was really cool because as a Canadian, born and raised in Ontario, Canada, I then come over to England, and I currently live in Kent, which is in the southeast, just outside of London. And then I do this test, and it says that my ancestry can be found in Greater London. So I just thought it was really cool. Number 2, Tyne and Wear. Honestly, I don't know where that is, but something in my gut tells me that's quite north. So Tyne and Wear. Number 3, Glasgow City. Any Scots watching? Hello. Guess what? Number 4, Merseyside. Also don't know where that is, but I'm pretty sure is that northeast? God, I have to look at a map. Number 5, Edinburgh. More Scots. Guess what? Number 6, Aberdeen City, followed by number 7, Aberdeenshire. Aberdeenshire. Anyway, number 8, West Midlands. Hello. Number 9, Greater Manchester. And number 10, South Yorkshire. So there's actually quite a lot of northern places there, quite a lot of Scottish places. And to be honest, that's actually not surprising. Growing up in Ontario, Canada, I actually knew my great-grandmother, one of them. She was actually alive, and I had a relationship with her when I was a kid, which is crazy just to think about just in itself. So my great-grandmother was from, any guesses?
Edinburgh.
Aberdeen. So I actually knew my Scottish great-grandmother, and I remember she always wore like a brooch that was a thistle with her own tartan, like her family tartan. And I always thought that was really, really cool. So doing my 23andMe test and getting a lot of Aberdeen, Scotland sort of places is not surprising because I knew of her. So of course it's picking up on her and her family. Now I know just from family stories that I had, I want to say great-grandparents, potentially, that were from Surrey. So maybe that's why I'm getting a Greater London sort of reading is from that part of the family. It's pretty cool.
Could be.
Now, if you're doing the math, we are off slightly. I do have a reading of 1.4% that is just broadly Northwestern European.
So it's DNA that was so commonly found among different populations that would be defined as Northwestern European that they just said, we can't decipher this and we're going to have to call it Northwestern European. And if you were to go into 23andMe and go to the confidence slider where you can change the confidence and you make the confidence go from 50% to like 90%, it's going to change everything to broadly, because that's the truth of it all, is that they're really getting mostly a broad sense, and then they're trying to do all these different tricks and algorithms and things like that to give you the most precise locations where your ancestry most possibly came from. But again, it's an estimation based on what they know, and this is really the least accurate part of these DNA tests. The most accurate part is the genetic matches. With this, it's more of kind of, I don't know, estimation really is just the best terminology for it. Scientific guess. Scientific estimation, I guess, to be more specific.
They say, due to migration or whatever, they can't pinpoint where that percentage comes from, but they give it the broadly Northwestern European title. So that's what it means to be Canadian. I am at 99.8% European and 0.2% from Cyprus. If we break down the European, that's 65.6% British, 32.8% Dutch, and 1.4% something else. We're not quite sure. So while I am always going to be Canadian, I do have a huge chunk of my heritage that is British, and I don't think that's too uncommon for a lot of Canadians. But it's a neat feeling to know that I am living where they came from, minus the Dutch. I'm so sorry. I probably will never live in the Netherlands, but it's a really cool country, so I'm not ignoring that side of the family. But I think it is really neat to be able to live in the UK and potentially see the same stuff that they did, or drink the same tea that they did, and have a lifestyle that is somewhat reminiscent of ancestors that I have never met. That's what I'm trying to say, I think. That sort of idea. Does that make sense? Anyway, I'm just rambling. I just think it's really neat. Anyway, I guess that's it for me. I am 99.8% European and mostly British. Good to know. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, bye! Maybe I should go have a cup of tea.
All right, that was a pretty decent video. She was doing the thing that I kind of don't like when people do in their videos, where kind of jumping to conclusions. I will say some of the things I was kind of not the happiest about how she interpreted it. Now kind of seeing further into it, it makes sense. Like when she was talking about, the French and German being Dutch. But there's still that possibility that maybe there's something else beyond just the Dutch that could be lumped into that French and German 32.8%. From everything that she says, it sounds like she has not looked into her family tree, at least not that seriously, which unfortunately a lot of people don't do. It's kind of funny to me how a lot of people will discuss how, these DNA tests really make them feel closer to their heritage and, oh, well, I visited this city, or I like this food, or I'm living in this area. And, now that I know that they live there because of the DNA percentages, it makes me feel closer. When in my mind as a genealogist, it's like, if you do your family tree, you actually get the full story. It's not just like your family lived in this kind of general area. It's your family, your so-and-so great-great-grand whatever was living here and did this and that. There's a lot that you can pull out of these tests. So a few things to kind of point out that I didn't really talk about previously. The Cyprus reading, the 0.2%, that is super, super trace. If that is actually correct and not just, noise or something, which, by the way, I should always say, when I say trace, I'm not really saying that it's insignificant. What I'm saying is it's a really, really small reading. And when it's just such a small reading, it makes the confidence in it being correct much lower. So with 0.2%, that's really low. And if it is actually coming from somewhere in our ancestry, we're probably going to be looking at well past third great grandparents, maybe even fourth or further. It is possible it could be as early as a second great grandparent, assuming that she just really did not inherit much of anything from that second great grandparent. Some interesting things to pull out when she was going through the list of the top 10. So the number one was London, which, not surprising, I said right beforehand, London's such a large area that there are so many people that have been born or lived there that it's, if you get some sort of British Isles or British and Irish reading, or however they put the population group, it's very likely you'll get some sort of connection to London pretty high up. But it's the small towns and the more unknown areas that will be the things to really focus on. So if I was doing her genealogy, I think it was either the number 2 or number 3 city was what seemed to be a really small town in the north of England. I think it was, Tyne something? I need to go and find what it was. Tyne and Ware. I'm assuming that's a very small town, small area. If I were researching her family tree, I would take that information as something to hold in the back of my mind as I go through documentation, where if I find something showing a connection to Tyne and Ware, it's going to be like, okay, this is making sense. One's a really small area where it'd be less likely to have a lot of matches, from there, unless you have a real true connection there, versus London, where it's a much higher likelihood that it's, I don't want to say false positive, but that's kind of what I mean. It's, it's not quite as significant as it seems just because it's such a large city. So that would be a big thing to pull out of that list of cities is, okay, we have this one area that's really small and that's significant. Beyond that, I don't think there's a whole lot that she would be able to really pull out from this. I mean, it is kind of just a general overview. But if she did a family tree, she'd get so much more information. And being that she is in, she's in Kent, which is right outside of London. But being that she is, she's in the UK and, in Europe right now, if she were to do her family tree, she could find specific places, not just like cities and towns, but buildings and, different parks or areas or whatever that her family had a tie to. If her great-grandmother was from Scotland, maybe she can find her great-grandmother's birth record and then go to where her great-grandmother was born. That's where the power of the family tree comes in over the percentages. And with the DNA test, the biggest thing that she would use to build out that family tree are the DNA matches, which she didn't really talk about, but technically she is, because by showing these towns, the top 10 or whatnot, it's giving a glimpse into numbers related to her genetic matches. So this was definitely an interesting one. Still a few critiques on how she interpreted some things, but it does make sense with what she does know about her family. But I just do it, if she does see this, if you do see this, hit me up and maybe we can look into doing your family tree, because I'm trying to do family trees for YouTubers. I've got a new series coming up. So maybe if you want to be on that, that'd be a good one to have. Well, thank you so much for checking out this video. I do hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. You can also click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It is completely free to do so. And as I mentioned before, if you'd like to get access to early content or even access to exclusive content, be sure to become a patron of mine on Patreon. And not only will you get all that fun access, but you'll also be helping support my channel. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.